Hi everyone. In this week's video blog, we're going to be focusing on sync groups, and the sync tools. Normally when it comes to capturing video, sync usually plays a very important role as the video is normally kept with audio on a tape. Smoke and Flame is aware of this, and there are various settings inside the capturing menus which allow when video is captured with audio to indicate that they are a synced pair. As you capture media, the video and audio will normally be indicated as what we call synced tracks. To show you this, if I just open up this timeline, you can see in this timeline these particular clips have got sync markers. The M is for master, and then the equal signs are indicating the slaves. This is what would normally happen when you're actually capturing from tape. However, with a lot of file-based workflows these days, some of them will have synced audio accompanied them, and some other file-based workflows will not. So what you need to ensure is that when working with this media, if they come from separate sources, you have the ability to be able to manually sync things together. Secondly, when using separate devices to capture video and audio respectively, there's always the chance that things might be slightly out of sync if there was a fault with the recording, or perhaps the video was started a fraction before the audio. Any of these things can happen, and we want to make sure that you can very easily control and adjust these when necessary within the actual edit or even at the finishing stage. So let's go ahead and start working with some individual shots that we will then create a sync group. On the desktop, in order for me to access my sync tools, I simply come to the main menu and choose to edit sync. Here we've got a piece of video and a piece of audio that are at the moment separate sources. So what I'm going to do is take this footage, we'll put it down onto the timeline and expand it out. You can now see this is simply just a video on its own, and if there's no audio tracks that exist, you can simply add them in whenever you need to. Take the audio that you would like to use as the sync group and simply drag and drop this into the timeline. When this gets added in, you can see straight away that this is actually audio that had 2 tracks, and originally this was a synced group. However, we would like the video to be the sync master of our audio tracks. So simply by holding down the Control hotkey, we can select the clips that we want to work with, and in the Edit Sync menu, you can see there's the option to go ahead and create sync. Once this is done, it now creates a sync group between the video and the audio. Once the sync group has been created, you can simply go ahead and collapse the clip and pull it back up onto the source area. Now when it comes to editing with this particular source, you will now notice that the indicators tell me that it has 1 video source and 2 audio sources. So if I was to go ahead and edit this into this timeline over here, so for example if I just go to the end and simply drop this onto the clip, as I edit it on, you will notice it gets edited in there and the sync groups and everything have been applied. This is how you can go ahead and edit your video and audio with sync. Now, having a closer look here at this particular timeline, you can see that all 3 shots in this timeline have got sync points applied to them. The one thing is that I can see that the audio and video is currently in sync. The way this is indicated, as I mentioned earlier, is by looking at the slaves. You can see these are indicated by equal signs. However, if you were to go ahead and start making adjustments, say for example I want to start trimming, you could accidentally knock things out of sync. Let's have a look at how this works. So in this case, I'm simply going to turn ripple on, and I'm going to go ahead and ripple the clip. You can see straight away that the 3rd shot, you'll notice that the equal signs have now turned red and they've turned to plus. This means that the video is slightly out of sync with the audio. This is one indicator in which tells you things are out of sync. Another indicator is to simply expand out the tracks of the slaves, and you will see 3rd line down on the clip, you can see it says sync. And at the moment, the sync indicator tells me that it's out of sync by 6 frames. So if I was to push this back into sync, you can see that as it goes back to 0, it is now back in sync with its video. As if I was to go ahead and push the video further, you can now see how it's now out of sync by a negative 13 frames. So reading this, the audio is 13 frames before the video, which means the 2 of them are out of sync. So this is one way in which you can use this to very clearly see if things have been pulled out of sync, and if we need to go ahead and adjust them, you need to be able to do this. Let's have a look at some of the examples that we can work with. I'm going to take the audio tracks and simply going to turn on their waveforms, so I can see very clearly where the audio is occurring. Now let's say for argument's sake I was to go ahead and make an adjustment, let's say on the video. So as I pull the video out, the audio for both this clip and this one, so the 2nd and the 3rd clip now are out of sync, and they are out of sync by 6 frames each. What you can do is one of 2 things. You can either go ahead and pull the audio back into sync by simply trimming the edit. That's step one. Or if this offset is intentional, so you can see how the video is definitely starting before the audio, what you can simply do is you can say, right, let's go ahead and take this audio that we have, which is currently 6 frames out of sync, and you can say, let's go ahead and resync it. When you click resync, you can see how the audio in both of the selected clips have now slipped automatically and have been resynced with the master. So this is not redefining what the sync point is, it is simply performing that operation of slipping the audio so that it falls in line with the video, and then the timings have now been correct. So this is one way in which we can ensure if you're doing offset editing between the audio and the video, you can keep everything in sync just by doing that particular case. The other thing to mention is if, for example, the video was recorded separately from the audio and there was a sync discrepancy, if you had already created the sync group, so I've got my sync group here with my different shots, if the audio, even though it was indicated to be in sync, was actually out of sync. So for example, maybe you had visually mistaken a sync point, maybe it's out by 1 or 2 frames, and I decide, okay, to make this back in sync, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both audio and we're going to go ahead and slip this. So I just slip it to make my adjustment. It now says that the audio is out of sync by 6 frames, but that is actually the correct sync point. What you can go ahead and do is you can simply go ahead and select these points, and instead of hitting resync, which will slip the audio back into sync with the video, you simply hit reset. When you hit reset, this now redefines the sync point between the audio and the video to be at this offset now. So as you can see, resyncing will slip the audio back into sync with the video, whereas the reset option will simply realign your sync point so that you can say, well, okay, well now this audio is now perfectly in sync. So you can adjust it, and this means even if you've captured video from tape and maybe there might have been a slight offset, or if they were recorded from separate sources, you could fix and adjust and tweak these settings for yourself and get the exact result to make sure that everything is held together in sync. The other important point to remember is you can see I've been selecting individual shots, so you can see very quickly when I select either video or audio, it is very easy for me to accidentally pull things out of sync. So what you can do is by using the sync button in the timeline, when you have got a sync group, the sync group will automatically select whatever is synced to it as a slave or master, and you can see when I now make my adjustments, you can see that everything will now always be kept in sync when I'm doing my editing on the timeline. Now, sync grouping is not simply just for syncing video to audio. You could use it creatively in a different way. So for example, if I was to go ahead and switch to this timeline over here, I've got 3 shots in the timeline that I would like them to be locked together. So one way of doing this, instead of always having to select each shot every single time I want to go ahead and make an adjustment to the multi-selection, you can simply select the shots that you want to work with and hit Create Sync. You can see that the very first shot that I selected, which was the first one, becomes the master and the other 2 are the slaves. If I wanted it to be the other way around, I could simply select, for example, if I was to select the second, then the third, then the first shot. If I then hit Create Sync Group from this, you can now see how the second shot is now the master. What it means now is I can obviously individually adjust these shots, but what I could also do is I could also go ahead and sync them together using the sync button. So when it comes to making any types of adjustments or editing to this, whatever is part of that sync group will always be selected and adjusted when I'm working with inside the timeline. I hope that you've enjoyed this very brief explanation of this typically overlooked tool, and you'll be able to use it during your normal working practice or help you fix those nagging issues that you may encounter every day, and always ensure that your video and your audio and everything else remains in sync.